Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à cette présentation de M. Daniel Toussaint. Hi everyone, je me présente, je m'appelle Maude-Emmanuelle, je suis la présidente de l'OBNL Les Amis du Sault-des-Chats. Je vous remercie d'être avec nous ce soir pour cette toute première conférence de notre série 2021. Je voudrais prendre quelques minutes pour vous présenter notre organisme et notre conférencier invité, M. Daniel Toussaint. Mis sur pied en 2017 par un groupe de résidents du Pontiac, Les Amis du Sault-des-Chats a pour mission de promouvoir les richesses patrimoniales, historiques et naturelles de la région du Sault-des-Chats dans le bassin versant de la rivière des Outaouais. L'organisme propose des conférences, des activités récréatives et des randonnées guidées à pied et à vélo, en canot ou en raquette dans le secteur de Pontiac et Bristol. The mission of the Friend of the Shawfall is to promote the cultural, historical, and natural wealth of the Shawfall region in the Ottawa River watershed. We organize conference, outdoor activity in respect of the area's exceptional native biodiversity. En septembre dernier, nous avons tenu notre 4e Assemblée générale des membres. Deux nouveaux administrateurs se sont joints à notre conseil d'administration. Le conseil réunit Michael McBain, Deborah Powell, Peter Houghton, la représentante de Bristol et conseillère des Biquet-Gore, ainsi que Aude Cadieux et moi-même. Pour connaître nos prochaines activités, je vous invite à suivre notre page Facebook. Il s'agit de notre toute première conférence en mode virtuel et j'espère que ce ne sera pas la dernière. Afin d'éviter les bruits de fond, je vous inviterai à garder vos micros sur sourdine. À moins d'avis contraire, je vous encourage à noter vos questions et à les poser au cours de la présentation. La présentation de M. Toussaint sera suivie d'une période de discussion. Pour poser une question, il vous suffira de cliquer sur l'icône de la petite main. Durant la présentation, during presentation, please mute your microphone. To ask a question, please click on Raise Hand icon. Maintenant, quelques mots sur notre conférencier qui nous parlera des richesses naturelles du secteur de Couillon et Bristol, aussi appelé le Sault-des-Chats ou Shawfall Area. Après avoir obtenu un baccalauréat en biologie avec spécialisation en écologie animale de l'Université Laval en 1982, Daniel est entré au gouvernement du Québec pour y entreprendre une carrière au sein de différents ministères responsables de la faune. Il a été amené à travailler tant comme chargé de projet sur le terrain, à divers volets de la gestion des ressources naturelles, de l'inventaire et du suivi d'espèces prélevées, au rétablissement d'espèces menacées en passant par l'analyse de projets ayant un impact sur l'environnement, l'aménagement et la restauration d'habitats, la concertation avec divers organismes et la gestion intégrée Faune-Forêts. Il a géré aussi différents projets, des équipes multidisciplinaires, en plus d'agir comme conseiller scientifique et stratégique auprès des gestionnaires. Au cours des dernières années, il a développé une expertise plus pointue sur les amphibiens et les reptiles, en plus d'être reconnu comme un expert régional des oiseaux. Il s'est aussi largement investi dans ses loisirs au sein d'organismes œuvrant dans le domaine de l'environnement et de la faune, dont le Club des ornithologues de l'Outaouais. Depuis sa retraite en avril 2016, il demeure actif dans son champ d'expertise en siégeant à différents comités et en effectuant du travail comme consultant et comme bénévole en ornithologie, en théologie et en foresterie, en plus d'enseigner à la Cité. Daniel Toussaint is a biologist who worked for over 3 decades on the ground and in the office in the Quebec departments responsible for wildlife. His experience covered natural resource management, fish and game inventory, to threatened species recovery programs and include environmental impact analysis, habitat management and restoration, integrated wildlife and forestry management. His work often requires coordination with other organizations, and he manages multidisciplinary project teams. In recent years, Daniel has further developed his expertise on reptiles and amphibians, and is also recognized as a regional bird expert. Since retirement in 2016, Daniel has remained active in his field of interest, working as consultant as well as volunteer and teaching at l'Université. Je voudrais en profiter pour remercier le Club des ornithologues de l'Outaouais qui aujourd'hui héberge notre conférence en ligne. Donc, un gros merci à Monique Boivin. So, I would like to thank today the Club des ornithologistes de l'Outaouais and Monique Boivin to host this conference. Je laisse maintenant la parole à Monsieur Daniel Toussaint. Merci pour votre présence et bonne présentation.
Alors, merci Maude. Je vais partager l'écran avec vous. OK. Donc, est-ce que tout le monde voit l'écran? Est-ce que vous voyez ce qui est affiché à l'écran?
Oui. Oui.
Okay. So my presentation is entitled The Natural Wealth of the Chat Falls Area. It's the second time I'm presenting it. The first time was in November 24, 2019. I updated a little bit the presentation for this time, but it's roughly the same as I already presented more than 1 year ago. So it goes like this, the plan, the presentation plan. The first thing I'd like to mention is that I prepared the presentation, the first version with Olivier Trudel, who is a biologist at the Quebec Ministry of Wildlife. He could not attend tonight, but we've done that presentation together. So the plan I will follow goes like this. We'll talk briefly first about the hydrography and geomorphology of the area, of the Chat Falls area, habitat diversity, then some slides on the flora, plants, which is not my field of expertise, but I have a few slides on that. And then we'll switch to fauna, wildlife. So we'll go through the main groups like amphibians and reptiles, birds, mammals, and fish. And finally, we'll say a few words about protection status and measures for the area. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me during the presentation. So when we talk about the Chat Falls area, this map here shows roughly which area we're talking about. So roughly it goes from Norway Bay to the west, to Cuillon east, Pontiac Bay here, and all the land that are comprised between the Ottawa River and roughly the Bristol Mine Road and the second concession in Cuillon. Interestingly enough, this area is surrounded by a few protected areas on the Ontario side. Like number one here is the Fitzroy Provincial Park. There's also the Morris Island Conservation Area, just in front of Black Bay, and Nopining Crown Game Preserve. It's interesting to note that it tells a lot about the biodiversity that thrives in this area. And one feature to notice is the old railway track that goes throughout the area from the bridge here to Ontario down to Norway Bay. We'll talk a little bit more about this railway corridor later in the presentation. And already you can notice that at the core of the area, in this area, there are several wetlands that are shown in blue here. And by the way, this map comes from the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it's the area that was thought about to create a wildlife refuge. So you see Projet de Refuge Faunique, Wildlife Refuge Project, Grand Marais de Bristol, So there was a project, and there still is a project. We'll end up the presentation with that tonight. Okay, a few words about hydrography. So the main feature in the area is the dam at Chat Falls, which is a hydro dam built in 1931, which is co-managed by OPG, Ontario Power Generation, and Hydro-Québec, although the management is mainly done by Ontario Power Generation. According to the data I could see from the website of the Quebec Ministry of Environment, the water retention height is 28 meters. So it's the water that the dam may retain upstream. But normally the retention, the water level is about 50 meters. I guess it's the figure between the upstream and downstream. But we might come later after the presentation with more details about this aspect. So this dam created a reservoir, which is called Lac des Chats, or Chat Lake, which is 77 square kilometers in area, or about 10,000 acres. Here, there's another map. There's a map, in fact, that shows the Ottawa River watershed. So all the area in this map represent the watershed of the Ottawa River from its source, which is north of Rouen in Quebec. And it's where it meets the St. Lawrence River in the Montreal area. So it's a huge watershed. What's interesting to note is that all along the path of the Ottawa River, there are several dams. For example, in the region we're talking about here, there are two dams, the Chat Dam and the Chenot Dam. So the area we talk about tonight is comprised between these two dams, but there are several other dams along the path of the Ottawa River, some managed by OPG, which are shown in red, and some by the Hydro-Québec in yellow. So we're talking about more than 1,000 kilometers long for the Ottawa River, the old Ottawa River. These dams, unfortunately, act as barriers for example, for fish and turtles. So we'll discuss more about especially for fish later in the presentation. Here in the region we're talking about, there are 40 kilometers between the two dams, Chat and Chenot. In our area here, the water variation is not so important. We're talking about approximately 1 meter water variation on a yearly basis. So it's not like in other reservoirs. For example, the Baskatong Reservoir here north of Maniwaki, the water variation level may be up to more than 20 meters difference between the high and the low of the reservoir on an annual basis. So it's more impact on fish and wildlife in such reservoir than here in the Ottawa River between these two dams. Because it's mostly a run of the river power station. So there's no real water control such there is in other reservoirs such as the Baskatong. Now, a few words about geomorphology. So the area is located in the Ottawa River Valley, which is quite flat. But at the edge of the Canadian Shield, which is a hilly terrain, the Canadian Shield is characterized by hills that has been eroded by the glaciers that covered the area some 10,000 years ago. So we're just at the edge between these two geological formations, the Ottawa River Valley and the Canadian Shield. So in the Chat Falls area, the topography is mainly plain. So the maximum altitudinal amplitude is less than 10 meters between the lowest point and the highest point. So it creates conditions for the existence of large wetlands, which is one of the key features of the area. So these wetlands are located in the bottom of the valleys, in natural depressions. And another important thing to note is that several of these wetlands are reshaped periodically by beaver activity. So there are lots of beaver dams, in fact, that create large wetlands in the area. And we'll see later the importance of these beaver dams, for example, for species such as the blandings turtle. The subsoil is one important feature in the area is the old iron mine. So this mine in Bristol was in operation for several decades. It's no longer in operation. Now we can see piles of mine debris that now are used for a crushed stone. So we see here in the image what we can see when we are in the area on Bristol Mine Road, for example. The soil, the surface soil, is mainly clay. It's a rich soil in the Pontiac, generally speaking. So we know that the southern of the Pontiac is mostly agricultural land, rich lands for agriculture, because of these clay that were deposited by the Champlain Sea some 10,000 years ago at the end of the late glacial age. So it explained the fertility of the soil in the area. But also another feature is the fact that surface geology is characterized by sandstones and especially limestones. Limestones harbor alvars. It's a special feature that we'll talk about later in the presentation. So there are a few alvars in the area, and it's due to the limestone surface geology. Okay, now the habitat diversity of the area. And by the way, this picture here at the top was taken from Ontario. You can see all the Chat Falls area here with the this old debris that goes that spikes over the flat land, mostly flat land. The characteristic of the area is that the habitats are very varied. It's a mosaic of habitats, in fact. You have open water, like the Ottawa River. You have strings of islands. We will see them more on the next slide. Bays, marshes, swamp, beaver ponds, and through that, forest patches. It's a mosaic of hardwood and mixed forest. You also have cultivated fields and pastures surrounding the area, and the abandoned mine also in sand pits, some sand pits in the area that are used by turtles, for example, to lay their eggs. So it's a varied mosaic of habitats. That's an important feature to retain. Here it's a zoom in to show you these wetlands, which are in pale yellow in this picture. and the forests, which are in green. You can see these islands, several islands all along the edge of the river, deep bays that we can see everywhere, that several bays with shallow water. This abandoned mine here. And I think on the next picture we see, or maybe later, the pasture land. So wetlands are a typical feature of the area. In fact, the municipality of Bristol boasts one of the highest density of wetlands in Quebec. It's 7% of its territory, so it's a high percentage as compared to other municipalities. So you see these huge beaver dams or swamps all over the place. Another picture here where we can see again the bays that goes inland with their shallow waters. One thing that is striking when you look at this picture is that the shoreline is undeveloped, except for a few cottages, in fact, in the Norway Bay area, and a few cabins interspersed in the area. It's very pristine area, in fact, undeveloped shoreline. So that's an important feature. So the bays are consisted with shallow water covered with aquatic grass beds. So it's a rich habitat because when you have shallow water full of aquatic vegetation, in terms of productivity, it's very productive. Insects, fish, lots of fish. So it's the basis of the food chain in the area.
Daniel, could I just interrupt you? We have a question for you.
Oui, okay.
Kevin, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I was just really curious about, was a lot of land lost after the dams went in?
It's a very good question. I don't know because, as I mentioned, the dam was built in 1931. So we can figure out that before the dam, you didn't have that lake like they showed the Chat Lake. It was probably more a corridor, the river. So sure, some land were lost, but in the meantime, it created new habitats like the wetlands. Part of the wetlands now are due to the flooding of the area of the lowlands. So I don't know if we can say that the loss as compared to the gains are equivalent, but sure there were some loss and on the other side some gains from the damming. Is it okay for you?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so all of this mosaic of habitats, it creates an exceptional habitat for turtles, as well as for other reptiles and as for amphibians. We will see that in more details. Here is an old map that I took from an old report from the ministry. It shows different kinds of wildlife habitats in the area that benefit some legal protection already. So, for example, all you see in pale yellow with bars, it's a deer yard. So there's a very big deer yard in the area. It's sectors where deer will concentrate during the winter time to have shelter and food at the same time. There are also heronries, héronières. So it's places where great blue heron nest. However, these locations change over time. So this is an old map. I'm quite sure now the heronries are not at the same location because the herons will nest in, for example, in beaver ponds where there are dead trees, and sometimes the trees fall, so they have to change location. But anyway, there are still 1 or 2 heronries in the area. Another habitat is the muskrat habitat, l'habitat du rat musqué, everything which is in pale green. Also, there's a aire de concentration d'oiseaux aquatiques. So it's aquatic bird concentration areas. So that's what here you can see it here. And there's also the fish habitat itself, all which is water, like the Ottawa River is a pristine fish habitat, a very important fish habitat. We will see that there are over 70 species of fish in the river. And so being a fish habitat, it benefits from a protection from the Fisheries Act, the Federal Fisheries Act, which prohibits some activities in the fish habitat. So there is some legal protection for fish and for those species I just mentioned before.
We have one more question.
Yeah, okay.
I don't
yes,
have your name. Can you give me your name, please?
it's Hope.
Hope. Okay, so Hope Katsu? Okay.
Yes, that's right. I was just going to say that when I mute the mic, I can't hear, I only get every second or third word.
Okay, so we'll keep you, I'll leave you unmuted.
Unmuted? Oh,
Yes.
good, thank you. And
You're
I don't know,
welcome.
can you see my picture? Okay,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay, I can go.
I
go
can
on.
see you. Okay.
Oh, okay,
Donc, tu peux
good.
continuer, Daniel.
Okay.
Okay.
So what I
Did you
just
have a
mentioned-
question, Hope, or?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say that I was always told that the river came up 32 feet, but I
you
never
mean-
understood
You mean the water
after the
variation?
dam. Pardon?
You mean the water retaining of the dam?
Well, that I was never sure of. I was never sure whether it came up 32 feet on our section of the land or whether it was actually 32 feet higher.
Mm.
But I don't,
I'll
yeah.
check that
It
out.
might
I
have
need
been
to check that
32
out.
feet. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember when I made the presentation first that I browsed through the websites of Hydro-Quebec and Ontario Power Generation to get these figures. So I may check that out again.
Oh, what did you have a height, an actual, a figure for it? Because I may have missed it.
Yes, it was, yeah, they say that the water retention, the power of the maximum height is 28 meters, but the normal level is 15 meters. So that would be the water retaining. So it's around 50 feet.
Oh, okay.
50 meters. Okay.
Wow. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. As for the wildlife habitats, I mentioned these 5 habitats here in the preceding picture. And also an important thing to know is that there are 33 species of wildlife species at risk in the area and 65 plant species at risk. So it's a very rich area in terms of species at risk. We'll go in more details. Now, a few slides about the flora. So here in Bristol, we are in the domain of the sugar maple bitternut hickory. So it's the southernmost domain of Quebec, all the ecological domains in Quebec. So it's just here at the tip of the province, the southern tip. So the climate here is more clement. So it's no surprise that the Quebec's most southerly species will be found here in the region. That's why, by the way, there are so many species at risk that are very present in the Bristol area, because several of these species are confined, are called thermophile species. They like heat, and they are confined to the very southern portion of the Quebec. The forest is quite diversified. You can, if you've been there, you know that there are white and red pines on more drier sites. And where it's wetter, you have silver maple, black ash, white cedar, red maple. So quite varied a bunch of trees. By the way, the black ash is vanishing because of this ash borer that you've heard of. So that's a problem with an exotic species that came here, and the landscape may change with all these ash disappearing eventually. Okay, one slide about alvars. Alvars is a specific ecosystem. It comes from the Swedish, it's a Swedish term. So what is an alvar? It's an open habitat, an open area with very thin soil. We see that in the picture here. It's open. The substrate is usually very thin. There's no humus at all. It's directly on the limestone substrate. So the growth of trees is almost impossible on that kind of areas, on alvars. And another characteristic is that it's sometimes at the edge of water that are flooded in the spring. So the area will be flooded, and then during the summer, it will go severe droughts. So only plants that can resist to severe conditions like that or extreme conditions may survive there. And there are specific plants that are specific to alvars that we can find in the area. There are, in fact, more than 30 plant species at risk in the Chat Falls area alone, which is 10% of Quebec list. And these alvar, where are they located? In fact, there are 16 along the Outaouais River between Gatineau and L'Île-aux-Allumettes, but most of them are in our sector here. I have 3 slides to show where they are. There is one in Cuillon, another at Pointe-Indienne here. Je sais que M. Faubert habite ici. So there's an alvar, a very huge alvar here, and one at the tip of the point, one at Pontiac Station also. Others are located in the Knox Landing area, north and south, also in Kilroy Bay here, just south of the mine. And also in Sand Bay, there are a couple of alvars there. So it's a very rare habitat in the province. There are more alvars elsewhere, like in Ontario, but in Quebec, it's a very rare habitat. And I found three plant species that were associated with alvars. So you have them here with their French, English, and Latin name. So there's the goldenrod, the specific species of goldenrod, the Seneca snakeroot, and the Virginia mountain mint. So these plants are typical of alvars. It's not necessarily plants that are outstanding as far as colors or forms are concerned. They may go unnoticed by a walker if you walk around, but when you are in an alvar and you find that specific plants, and it's you won't find them elsewhere. I think there are some botanists among you that may confirm that they already maybe they have seen these plants there. Is there somebody who knows these plants? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's just to tell you that there are very rare plants there. I have a couple of more slides on the plants, very rare plants that you can find in the Bristol area that are not associated with alvars, but that can be found in different other habitats, like the duckweed here. It can be found in the wetlands. So it's a very rare plant at the Quebec level. Also the aromatic sumac, which looks like poison ivy, l'herbe à puce. Donc, c'est une autre espèce d'herbe à puce. C'est pas l'herbe à puce qu'on connaît. Also the eastern red cedar, qu'on appelle le genévrier de Virginie. It's a shrub that grows on only in the extreme southern Quebec, and we have some in the Bristol area. So that's another example. I have maybe 6 or 7 more. The Calms lobelia, the leathery grape fern, which is one of there are several ferns in the area, but this one is a very rare one. But it doesn't look like a rare fern. It's just, it looks like a fern. You have to know first how to recognize it, and then that it only grows in a specific location in southern Quebec. The same for the viper bugless, Viperine commune. There are a couple of species of Viperine, but this one is very rare, and we can find it. And by the way, we know that they are in the Bristol area because there's a group in Quebec called Flora Québécois, which is a group of botanists, eager botanists, who do some survey just for fun. So every year they go to a different place just to make plant surveys, and they came several times in the Bristol area because it's one of the richest sector in Quebec for plants. Other example here, the downy rattlesnake plantain, the fringe polygala, arrowwood. So maybe some of you know some of these plants. Any questions on plants? Other examples here. Another fern, very nice fern. The limestone maiden air spleen-wort. So just by the name, you see that it grows on limestone, on calcareous substrate. And the last but not the least, the ginseng, which is present in the Bristol-Clarendon area. This plant is very sought after for its roots that are quite popular as a medicine in traditional in countries like China, for example. They use that as a traditional medicine. So it may threaten the species, and that's why we keep the location top secret. Here, what you see is a group of volunteers from probably the NCC, Nature Conservancy of Canada, who have a group of volunteers that do surveys in the territory and specific surveys for ginseng. And whenever they find some plants, they will put around, it's not easy to see here, but it looks like a teepee. It's just pieces of log put together to form a teepee over the plant to prevent the deer to go to graze them. So sometimes it works. The deer may just go around and try to browse elsewhere. So any questions?
Danielle, we have a question from Ole Hendrickson asking, are there any records of bitternut hickory in the Shaw Falls area? iNaturalist does not show any.
Bitternut hickory?
Yes.
Ça, c'est-tu le carrier cordiforme en français?
Yes.
I don't know. I would have to check because when I mentioned the bitternut hickory, it was the name of the domain. So the Quebec have been divided in several domains, and the southernmost is the sugar maple butternut hickory domain. So it doesn't mean that you will find the hickory everywhere, but it's a plant that is usually associated with maple in this domain. So if you don't find a specific location, it doesn't mean that you're not within the domain. But as to know if are there hickories there, I don't know personally. But maybe someone else among you may know. Does it answer to your question?
Yes.
I may mention something. There's a website called iNaturalist, or e-naturalist, I don't know how to pronounce it. And people enter their natural observation on that site. It may be plants, animals, mushrooms, insects, anything. So if you go on e-naturalist or iNaturalist website, you can search, you can browse with filters, ask for specific species, and then you will see every locations where, for example, butternut hickory has been reported by participants. So it may help to visualize where they are in the territory. So that's a resource that may be helpful. I take a note and I'll browse through that after the presentation, and I may come back with answers to some questions after the presentation through email, like the other one for the water level of the dam. Okay, now I switch to fauna, to wildlife. So I'll talk about the different groups. Just to know if you know your wildlife, can you identify that snake at the bottom right?
Oh boy. Is it a queen, a milk snake?
Other answers?
Une couleuvre brune.
Maybe I could, it's at the edge of water that we see that snake. So it's a water snake. In fact, the way to recognize it is by these black bars just beneath the eye. So that's the best criteria when you have the species at hand or very close. So we'll go through these species. Just to tell you that I will go through amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammal, and fish. Yeah? A question?
No.
Okay. In the Bristol Clarendon area, I used to include Clarendon also because most of the studies I've taken part in covered Bristol and Clarendon area. It's pretty much the same in the Clarendon area, the southern part of the edge of the Ottawa River. We have the same habitats and the same biodiversity. So in both these areas, we have 24 wildlife species at risk. So you see them here. There are 10 bird species. You have the French and English names here. Some of them, for example, the grasshopper sparrow is confined to the Pontiac in the province of Quebec. So it's present not inside the Chatfall area itself, but just north of it in the pasture area, pasture lands. So many species are rare there, like the chimney swift, olive-sided flycatcher in the swamps, these bittern in the swamps, sedge wren in sedge fields. Several species of reptiles are at risk and are present in this area. Some bats, for example, mentioned here, and 2 fish species, American eel and lake sturgeon. So there are lots of research works that were conducted in the area. I participated myself in many of them. So just to give you an idea, if we look at the southern Outaouais, so not just the Bristol Clarendon area, but all the south of Outaouais, there have been Aaron Reed surveys at different times, waterfall gathering areas, the last time in 2008, deer winter yard surveys. In fact, it says here 2006, but sure there were more recent ones by the ministry. I don't have the last time. Muskrat colony surveys, peregrine falcon nest surveys. The MTQ, Ministry of Transport, made studies on turtle mortality related to road traffic. So it was done in 2007. NCC, also Nature Conservancy of Canada, has a study ongoing on turtle mortality They have a website called Carapace, where people may report turtle mortality or just turtle observations. Also, it's worth mentioning the Quebec Breeding Bird Atlas, which was done a few years ago, and that covered much of southern Quebec. But there were also research specific to the Bristol-Clarendon area. There was a map turtle survey in the 90s, as well as landing turtle surveys in the 19s and the 2000s. Donc, des études sur la tortue géographique et la tortue mouchetée. Aussi la tortue musquée, the musk turtle. There were studies at 2 different times. The Canadian Wildlife Service also made their own studies on different groups, bats, mammals. They made a breeding bird survey in 2006, small mammal survey in 1999, and so forth. So there were really several studies in the area. It's a well-known area in terms of wildlife. And more recently, over the last 3 years, I would say, there's a new kind of study that took place. It's DNA studies, environmental DNA studies. So just briefly, how it works. Any animal living in water, like a turtle, for example, will lose some skin, for example, or the inner cells of their digestive system. So that goes into the water. So if you take a water sample and you bring it to a laboratory and go through a PCR process to check the DNA, you can identify within the water itself if such or such turtle was present in the area. So it's a very innovative way to studying wildlife using their DNA that they leave in the environment.
There's a question, Danielle.
Okay.
From Carol Savard, why it seems as though since 2010, there are fewer studies. Why would that be?
Okay, it's mostly because the studies done in the the early 20s were really the first studies in Quebec on turtles. And we didn't know mostly anything about what are the repartition, the area where they lived, their biology, and so forth. But then we did these studies and we gained a very good understanding, and now we know where they are. So there's no real use to conduct as many studies as before. But now we concentrate on DNA studies, which are quite more effective because with the same resources in terms of personnel, we can cover much more area and much more species. In one water sample, we may check for turtles, for fish, for mussels, any animal that we can sequence their DNA. And by the way, it has been done for all our turtles in Quebec. So just going through water samples, we can study these species and make monitoring studies over the years. So that's the new method. One that I didn't mention here that comes to my mind is the use of drones. Drones? Is it les drones? Est-ce que c'est drones?
Yep.
So they are more and more used in wildlife studies. And for turtles, we realize that turtles fear less drones flying over them than boats approaching them. So it's more effective to use drones to try to count turtles on logs, for example. So that's new methods that have been used. And I know that there's a project in the Pontiac. It was halted in 2019 because of COVID. But once the situation comes back to normal, there will be some DNA and drone studies in the Pontiac with some turtle species. Just to mention the biodiversity of herpetofauna, which is amphibians and reptiles. Almost all Quebec species are there. We have 16 out of 21 native amphibians and 12 out of 16 reptile species of Quebec present in the area. So it's very rich in terms of herpetofauna. Not only in species, but also in numbers. We have high numbers of species, but also high population densities of these species, probably among the greatest in Quebec for several of these. So it's not only the number of species, but also the density, the number of individuals. For example, in terms of population, the site, the Bristol area, holds the largest population of blandings and east moss turtle of the province. Donc, les plus fortes densités au Québec pour la tortue mouchetée et la tortue musquée. The same for the map turtle, tortue géographique, which is among the 3 largest population in the province. And for another species, the eastern ribbon snake, which is the couleuvre mince, eastern ribbon snake. It's one or 2 known places in Quebec where this snake can be found. So 2 places in Quebec, we have 1 in Bristol. So that's another key feature. Another interesting thing, and we'll come back later with Nature Conservancy of Canada, but because of this concentration of species, the NCC has targeted the Bristol area as one of the key places to buy lands for protection. So I'll show you maps later about the lands they own in the area. So just rapidly, I'll go to just to show you some pictures of these studies that were made over the years. Like the first map turtle studies in 1992, we had to catch these turtles, which is not an easy task. So we use long épuisettes, how you say that in English?
Nets?
Long nets, like you see in the pictures, to catch them and mark them. We used to mark them by putting some des encoches, some
Notches?
notches with a line, yeah, on the border of their carapace to identify them by individual. So that's one of the methods that can be used. So if you have, here you have the map turtle. If you look at the correct carapace, it looks like a topographic map with elevation, you know, altitude. So that's why we call that map turtle. So here's this map shows results where we discovered these map turtles. So we found new sites in 2007 when this survey was done. Everywhere you see this mauve color here is where you have this turtle in the area. And we were even able to estimate the population between 300 and 1,000. It's hard to have a very precise estimate, but it's between these figures. So it gives you a rough idea of how many turtles are in the area. Another species that was surveyed is the tortue mouchetée, the blandings turtle, with its quite bright yellow breast or gorge, chin, no, excuse me.
Throat.
Yeah, so it was capture, mark, recapture studies. So the same, we would capture the turtles, mark them, leave them, go back in their wetlands, and we were recapturing them. So with this technique, we can estimate the population of the turtles. It helps us also identify where they nest, where they lay their eggs, and where are their hibernation sites, where they spend the winter, in which wetlands. So maybe you can not see very well, but what this map shows is the dots where we found, for example, the red dots are egg-laying sites. The blue one are hibernation site where they spend the winter. The turtles winter at the bottom of wetlands or of ponds. And so they were present throughout the area that we're talking about here. And the population estimate was quite the same as for the map turtle, between 3,000 and 100 individuals in the area. We found 10 egg-laying sites and 15 hibernacula sites where they spend the winter. Any questions on these surveys? I still have a few slides to come, so I may wait at the end of my slides. So there was also another blending turtle surveys, but that encompasses a more global area from Gatineau to l'île aux Allumettes, l'île du Grand Calumet, which was done in 2008. So everywhere where you see yellow spots on that maps are locations where we found the wetlands with blending turtle. So all the wetland studies are in pink, and those with blending turtles in yellow. So it's a species that is quite common in the Pontiac, the blending turtle. The map turtle is restrained to the Ottawa River itself. You only find them in the Ottawa River, but the blending turtle, la tortue mouchetée, can be found all throughout the southern Pontiac. Another species, the musk turtle, la tortue musquée, the smallest one that we have in Quebec. And I think it's one of the most smallest turtle on Earth. Another one that can be found only on the Ottawa River, not in the marshes at the edge of Ottawa River, only in the river. That's a nocturnal species that lives in the water all its life, except to lay their eggs. So we put some radio transmitter on some turtles here, as you can see. So with telemetry, we could follow them all throughout the year to know, for example, where they spend the winter, where they live most of the time. And we had first to capture them with fight nets and before releasing them. So that's an interesting project. It was a master degree project made by students of Ottawa University at that time. So we found the species in some locations like Bristol Mines and Wickens Bay, Eat Bay and Bristol Mines. So we estimated the density, 4 turtles per hectare. So it's it's not very high. There are fewer musk turtle than any other species there. Only 300 individuals at max in the area. So it's a rarer species. Another study on that species was made more recently in 2011 for the same purposes, but it was in the Clarendon area. So we wanted to survey a new area to see if there were musk turtles there also. And we surveyed an 18-kilometer stretch at that time between Norway Bay and Channel Dam. And we caught 23 turtles at 7 sites. So yes, the musk turtle is also present in Clarendon. We see here on the map where we found them. It's the yellow and orange spots. So it's mostly in the Sand Bay area and a little bit downstream. But also a few spots like in, maybe Snow Road, Chemin Snow that goes here in Clarendon. There's a spot there, a bay. And also we found there, which is quite near Portage du Fort, the other dam. So that species seems to be quite widespread. because we also have in Bristol, which is downstream from Pine Lodge. So it seems that there are two main populations in the area, the Sand Bay area and the Bristol area. Okay, before we switch to birds, are there any questions on turtles? Okay, anyway, you can ask questions at the end of the presentation also. So now birds, there are in the MRC Pontiac 261 species in total. This is a figure that I took from the eBird website. So eBird works by MRCs, so you can go in eBird and check the species in each Quebec MRC, or if you go in other provinces, it may be other kind of territories, but here in Quebec, it goes with MRCs. The Pontiac is a hotspot for grasshopper sparrow. That's the only place, in fact, in the province now that where the species nest, and it's getting very rare. But there are several other species at risk. I will show you some. Just here in this picture, you can see the bald eagle, which is not so much at risk now. Their populations are increasing very fast, like most raptors. Here you have the...
Daniel?
Oui?
A question about the grasshopper sparrow.
Okay.
I understand that there used to be tobacco fields, and that is why the mullen, the grass that attracts the grasshopper, that bird in particular is present. Is that so?
Yeah, I'll just move forward a few slides just to show you the Bruant sauterelle, the grasshopper sparrow. Mm-hmm. So it's that small bird that's the size of a house sparrow, maybe a little bit bigger. The grasshopper sparrow will live in fields with mullen, as you said, Monique. I think you can see it here in this picture.
Yeah.
So they use the mullen. I don't know what's the English term for that plant, but they serve as perch for grasshopper sparrows. And they grow in a dry, sandy substrate. So in the Pontiac, in some regions, you have dunes, habitats like in Calumet Island, also in the Charville area, very sandy areas that were well suited for tobacco culture. So I don't know if it's because there's no more tobacco culture, but the habitat, the substrate did not change, but maybe the use of the land changed. The grasshopper sparrow lives in fields which are not harvested early in the season, not in cornfields or bean fields. It's mostly in pastures or like friche en français, where the regrowth, you know. So it has to be opened with perches. So maybe one of the reasons for the decline is the changes that has been done in agriculture in the Pontiac, because we see more and more monocultures of either corn or soya or other type of cultures. So that probably did not help, but also another reason for the decline is that the insects that we find in the pastures and field areas are also in the decline because of our modern agricultural practices. The insects are rarer, so it also affects the alimentation of the grasshopper sparrow as well as other species associated with fields.
So we have a translation for mullen. Mullen is apparently mullen, M-U-L-L-E-N, but it is not cattail, that's for sure.
No. No,
Quite
here what we
different.
see is really not cattail.
Yeah.
I know the picture is small. It's really a mullen. Yeah, a mullen. Yeah.
But just to give you an idea of how lucky we are to have the grasshopper sparrow in the Pontiac, I hosted a group from just outside of Montreal a couple of years ago, and they were on their knees thanking me for having brought them to the grasshopper sparrow. And I thought, I did nothing. I mean, that's where it is. So we're quite lucky to have that sparrow. For a lot of the people, it was a lifer. So it was the first time in their lives that they had ever seen that bird.
Yeah. There's another bird also that you can see here on the left. It's the golden wing warbler, which also is present in Pontiac and Vinton area, and not in the Bristol area, but there's a site which is in Vinton where bird watchers will go to see that bird, which is quite rare now. So there are a few highlights in the Pontiac, like the least bittern at the bottom here is present in the Knox Landing area in Bristol, and it's a very rare heron, so it's interesting to have them there. So I present you here some bird species that we can find in the area. Some of them are typical of wetlands, like the pied-billed grebe, a common bird, but specific to wetlands. The two rail species, Virginia rail and Sora, the least bittern here, which is the smallest of our herons, a bigger heron here, which is the American bittern, the common yellow throat, which is the probably the most common warbler in marshy areas. Other like waterfowl. I mentioned earlier that there are waterfall concentration areas along the Ottawa River. There is one near the Knox Landing area where during the migrations in spring and fall, you can have hundreds of scalps and scoters and other diving ducks, as well as dabbling ducks like mallards that we see here. Also geese and mostly Canada geese, but sometimes brants and snow geese also. The green blue heron. So I mentioned the heronries. So what it looks like, it's usually in beaver ponds where dead trees, they use dead trees, they erect platforms at the top of the trees to raise their youngs. It also may be in islands. For example, there are some heronries in living trees in islands, but usually it's isolated areas. So the mean number of nests, by the way, is around 15 in the Outaouais. So it may be 1, 2, 3, but it may go sometimes over 100 nests, but the mean is 15 nests. A question here? Okay, so I was talking about the country birds a few minutes ago, like the grasshopper sparrow. There are several bird species in the Pontiac that are called aerial insectivores. It means that they will feed mostly during the breeding season of insects that fly in the open. So just think of the barn swallow, for example, or the tree swallow, which are two species of swallows that eat almost exclusively insects during the summer. But insects get rare with the modern agricultural practices. So they are, all our species of swallows are on the decline now, unfortunately. And it's the same for all these aerial insectivores like the bobolink, the upland sandpiper, the chimney swift, savanna sparrow. I don't know what's the status of the bird is, but all the others here are in the decline. By the way, the chimney swift, you probably know that maybe some of you with Deb and others participated in the project in Shawville to create a new chimney to host the chimney swift. So one of the reasons of the decline is the fact that they get less access to chimneys, but also because of the diminution of the insects, the flying insects. Other species that are not all aerial insectivores, but will eat insects during the breeding season, like the cowbird is also in the decline, the meadowlark, grasshopper sparrow, the whippoorwill, even the kestrel is the population are shrinking because it's among the raptors is the one that is the most associated with agricultural areas like pastures and fields. Other raptors, like for example, hawks, falcons are on the contrary raising, their populations are raising. Also here, there's snow bunting. That's a bird that we see in winter in the fields. I've seen more than 100 of them a couple of days ago on Steel Line in Cuillon. So they are now here for the winter, and they nest in the Arctic. Other bird species of interest here, so I present some, like the Canada goose. Canada goose, the thing to know is that their population are raising quite fast, but it's a subspecies of the Canada goose that is on the rise, because the species that nest in the north is a different subspecies of Canada goose. Those geese that we see at the end of September, very high in the sky, crying, coming back from the north, are not the same subspecies as those who nest here. So we have two races, if you will, or subspecies of Canada goose, and the one that nest here, they are in the increase at an astonishing rate. They are even considered as annoyances in some places.
Nuisance.
Nuisance, okay, merci Monique. The Dindon sauvage, wild turkey, a species that was introduced in Quebec in early 2000s, and which is now quite common. Too common for some people, like some farm people, because they complain that they eat their grain, or so they're, by some it's considered as a species that we should not encourage. But hunters like them, it's a good snack. It's I think it's 20 pounds, so that's a good snack. Ring-billed gull, I know that there's an island off Bristol on the Ottawa River. I think it's called Lighthouse Island or something like that, where the ring-billed gull nest by hundreds. The huh? Do someone know that island in the middle of the Ottawa River? I think it's in front of Bristol, yes, or Norway Bay.
Yeah.
So the ring-billed gulls nest there by hundreds. They nest very often on islands like here in Elmer, on the Conroy Island in Deschênes. So it's a colonial species. Bank swallows also are colonial. Here we see the Bristol mine. Inside one of the section of the mine, there are sand cliffs, which are used by bank swallow. So that's one of the most important nesting site in the region in terms of number of swallows. We're talking about 30 to 60 swallows. It's not so much, but it's bigger than most of the colonies that are left now. Loggerhead shrike, that's a very pathetic story for that species, because it used to be common, but it disappeared from the province of Quebec. It's now only present in Ontario and Manitoba in Canada. I know the Cobden, not Cobden, is it the Cob? No, not the Cobden. There's I don't remember the name of the locality in Ontario, south of Ottawa, where there's a core population there. Anyway, there were efforts in Breckenridge to reintroduce that species in the late 90s and early 2000, I think. Shrikes were brought from Montreal. They were raised in captivity, and then they were transferred in volière, in, how do you say in volière? A place where they can fly, but they are prisoner, like a very big cage, you know? So they were put in big, huge cages to get acquainted with the environment, and then the doors were open and they were released. So several dozens of shrikes have been released in Breckenridge, but no one came back nesting in the years since then. The only one who came back, in fact, there were two nesting mentions in the Pontiac since then. One in 2010 in Trillon. A couple raised 3 youngs successfully. And last year, I think it was in Thorn Lake Road, there was a couple there in Thorn Lake Road, but they didn't succeed in nesting. And one of the birds had been banded in Ontario, so it was not one of our birds from Breckenridge that came there. Any questions on that? Okay.
Is that the
Yeah?
is that the mullen?
No.
Yeah?
Est-ce que la pie-grièche mange de la molenne?
Ah, okay, c'est ça la question. No, it doesn't eat the mullen. It's perched there on the mullen, but it eats either small birds or small rodents like mice. And what they will do is that they will, c'est-tu buckthorn, les plantes avec des épines, là? Buckthorn? Buckthorns. So they will put their prey on the spines of buckthorns. Sometimes, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a predator, in fact. It eats small birds and small rodents, sometimes insects also. Like they were fed with grillon, with kind of grasshopper when in Breckenridge. Yeah, but they eat mostly birds and mice.
Thank you.
Yeah, the peregrine falcon used to nest in the crater in Bristol Mine, but it's no longer there because the water level raised over the years. So the cliffs where they nest have been submerged by water.
Just to come back to the shrike, Kevin Roy was asking about a better photo of the mullen. So the photo of the loggerhead shrike perch is on a mullen.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. It looks like corn spike, but it's not the same. Yeah. Okay. Now, a few words about fish. There are 63 species of fish in the Ottawa River between in the Ottawa region. So let's say between the Swisha, Rapid de Joachim, to the Carillon Dam. So most of these species are present in the Bristol area. You have, for example,
Just one last comment on the loggerhead shrike.
Okay.
There's a comment from Mr. Hendrickson saying that Carden Alvar, east of Lake Simcoe in Ontario, is one of the last loggerhead shrike habitats in Canada.
Yeah, that's the place I was looking for, Carden. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Napanee area also in Ontario. So it's one of the core spots for that species, and that's where the Canadian Wildlife Service is concentrating its efforts now to reestablish the species. Now, fish. We see some species here that you can find on the Ottawa River, like the river red horse. the American eel. This species is of some interest because it used to be very abundant in the Ottawa River, and it was one of the most sought after fish by native American, les Amérindiens, the native people that lived here. They relied largely on eels to survive, but they got rare because of these dams on the Ottawa River that doesn't allow us to migrate. And you know that the eels, they will reproduce in the Sargasso Sea, and they will come back in the fresh waters after. So they have to migrate to complete their life cycle. So there are efforts in the Outaouais, especially by Ottawa River Keeper. Maybe you know that organism. They work in cooperation with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and the Quebec Wildlife Department to restore eel populations in the Ottawa area, for example. And they install some migratory paths to help fish migrate through dams, for example. Some species were caught by commercial fisheries up to recent years, like the lake sturgeon, the channel catfish. Now the Quebec government rebought most of the permits, so there are no more commercial fisheries in the Outaouais River, except maybe for one guy in the Pontiac, if I remember well, and he cannot take lake sturgeons or eels. I think he only fish for catfish. But it's another reason why the populations decline is because of the fisheries that were too much for what the species could tolerate. One of the most sought after species is the walleye in the Ottawa River. Fishermen are quite, it's a very good fish, so it's very well fished in the Ottawa River. And lastly, the mammals. So I don't go through all the mammals that you can find there, but remember that it's a top quality habitat for beaver and muskrat, considering the importance of wetlands there. And a bunch of other species, deer, bear, minks, and all this family, coyotes, red fox, bats, etc. So there are lots of mammals there. One thing to mention is that the species like raccoons or les bêtes puantes, les skunks. Yeah, skunks, they will dig turtle nests to eat the eggs. So that's one of the big problems our turtle are facing because the density of these predators like raccoons and skunks are higher than in natural conditions because of human presence. So that's one of the problems facing the turtles in general. Okay, this ends the main part of my presentation. If you are still patient, 15 minutes, I have slides about the protection measures and the status of the area. So if you have any questions on birds, turtles, mammals, fish, on what I've said, you may ask them now or wait to the end. And if it's okay, I will go on with the end of my presentation. Okay, let's start with, I think I didn't have that slide in my presentation in 2019. Maybe you know there's a group called the Canadian Herpetological Society. It's a group interested by turtles and amphibians and reptiles in general. And they settled a program called IMPARA. It goes for important amphibian and reptile areas. So they try to figure out where are the important areas for these species in Canada. So far, they determined 12 sites in Canada, as mentioned below here, including, for example, Point Pelee Island, the Georgian Bay Islands, for example. And the Ministry of Natural Resources has proposed that the Grand Marais de Bristol, so the Chat Falls area, be proposed to get that status. So it was proposed in 2018, quite recently. It's still in the process of being studied. I hope it will be done in 1 year, maybe. There are 2 sites, in fact, in Quebec that are considered now, the Bristol area and the Montagne Verte area south of Montreal. So it's not a protection itself, it's just a status, but it gives another argument to protect the species. You know, it doesn't come with regulation or more restrictive measures, but it's a recognition of the importance of the area. So that's a thing that might be important for you to know, that you may get that status quite soon. Now, wildlife refuge. There are 3 wildlife refuge projects in the Outaouais River, along the Outaouais River. These projects are, it's a MFFP project, so it's the Ministry of Natural Resources who wants to create different wildlife refuge along the Ottawa River. The one that you see on the right here, east of Gatineau, goes between Gatineau and Toussaint. This project is quite advanced. In fact, we hope that it will be decreed. We have the decree to create it maybe before 1 year from now. And there are already there's already a group who will help manage this area that has been created and who will have its annual meeting pretty soon. So this, I'm sorry, my telephone is ringing. I'll just, okay, sorry for the interruption. Yeah, there are 2 other projects, one in Bristol and one in Clarendon. These projects are not well advanced. It's just when the ministry started studies that I've talked to you, you realized that it was a hotspot for biodiversity in Bristol and in Clarendon. So the idea of putting a refuge, a wildlife refuge status on that emerged then. But it's not well underway because in Bristol, it's the same area that was suggested to become a regional park recently. You know that project. There were, I don't know if I have a slide. Yeah, so it was a regional park project, which have been called the Sault-des-Chats, Parc Régional. It's mostly the area, the same area we study, and that you probably, friends of Chatfall, do your activities inside. So there was a master plan, concept d'aménagement. It was done by the MRC and the Economic Development Corporation of the Pontiac, and also the MRC des Collines in 2012. So at that time, we were quite convinced that a regional park would take place here. So the ministry put on the ice his refuge project because the 2 status, it's hard to see that we could give 2 different status over the same territory. But now it looks like the regional park project, we don't hear about it anymore. So maybe the ministry someday will come back with his refuge project on that land here. What's a wildlife refuge? Just to give you an idea. It's a territory created under the Quebec provincial laws by the Ministry of Wildlife, and it comes with regulations. So inside a wildlife refuge, we can put different conditions, different regulations. It may goes like prohibiting certain types of activities, logging, drainage, construction, hunting could be regulated, commercial facilities. Agriculture can be either prohibited or controlled with different measures. Camping, campfires, etc., domestic animals, etc. So each refuge has its own regulation. So in the refuge east of Gatineau, there's a set of regulation that has been put in place. If there were to be a refuge in the Pontiac, we'll have to discuss which regulation we will put in place. The ministry will consult all stakeholders in the area to try to figure out which activities could be prohibited. For example, ATVs, could be a prohibited activities in the area under a wildlife refuge, or it could be permitted, depends on the discussions. And I'm mentioning that because of the project, the ongoing project from the MRC now that you probably know about the old CN railway. Now, another kind of...
Kevin has a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, would historical things be regulated?
Like what?
Oh, let's say that Indian Point, Mundian Point is very historical for the Hudson Bay Company.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if historical type things can still be developed for the area.
Okay. When I was at the ministry, what we were encompassing for that wildlife refuge here in Bristol was mainly to protect the habitat of the wildlife. It doesn't mean that you cannot do anything. For example, you can put up a path or a trail at some conditions in a way that you don't hurt wildlife or wildlife habitat. So,
okay.
So it could be possible to do some development, but it has to be taught and to fit also with conservation servitudes, because I was to talk to you about NCC conservation. You know, Nature Conservancy of Canada, Conservation de la Nature Canada, qu'on appelle NCC, not to confound with the National Capital Commission and Gatineau Park, you know, it's another organism. What they do is that they buy lands. And once a land is bought by NCC, it's protected. There's a conservation servitude on it, and you cannot do anything on that land afterwards. So they bought several lands in the Bristol and Clarendon area because you see that we fit in their conservation target. Here is the region that they call the Ottawa River Valley Natural Area. And within this region, they have targets. I'll show you.
Just to finish up on Kevin's question or comment, Maude was saying that cultural heritage is protected in Quebec, by the Loi sur le patrimoine culturel.
That's
and then
true.
The horse-drawn railway path in Bristol is registered in the répertoire du patrimoine culturel du Québec. And we also have a question from Hope.
Yes. What about the cottage communities? Some of which are full-time residents now.
I don't know.
Pontiac Station was what I was thinking, because they're right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I know that there are already people there. I don't think the refuge will throw them out. For example, there are cabins also along the shores that were tolerated by Hydro-Québec. So they sure won't be removed, and people living there or having cottage there won't be thrown out of there. But it may means that there will be no further cottage development in the area, you know?
What about Norway Bay? Norway Bay is also included in this area.
I think it falls just outside. Look
Oh,
here.
okay.
Yeah, the core of the village is just outside of the refuge preliminary target map, you know. So they
Okay,
won't
I was just wondering.
They won't go after people in Norway Bay.
No, I didn't think so, but I was worried about Pontiac Station because it's smaller,
Yeah,
but well
I think-
established.
Yeah, but really, I don't know what exact measure or precise measure will be taken, but it will be discussed. Once the ministry cannot put a refuge there without consulting everybody, including you, including the MRC, the municipalities. So everybody will have its say, and there will be some compromises, sure, some way down the road. Okay, I was talking about the.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, I was talking about acquisitions of land by NCC. It's astonishing because just in the Bristol area, in Clarendon area, they bought more than 25 lots since early 2000s, totalizing 2,300 hectares. So it's quite a huge area. It's worth more than $2 million that they have acquired in the Bristol and Clarendon area. They have other places like in Breckenridge, but their core, the core of their lots is in Bristol and Clarendon. And they're still buying. They bought a new one in 2019 in Bristol. There was a press conference there. I think it's at Maude's place, huh? So here is a map where you can see all these properties that they bought. So in the Bristol area, everything here in pale or dark green has been bought by the Nature Conservancy. Same thing in Clarendon area along the river here. And what you don't see is that most of the other lands, like here, are owned by Hydro-Québec, the same here in Clarendon. So if you are to put a refuge there, there are not so much private lands left, but you still have to cope with local resident because there are private lands through that. It's not a continuous territory, you know, but it shows you the importance they put on buying lands in that area. And they reviewed their conservation targets recently. I participated myself in that exercise. What they wanted to do is to prioritize where they would buy lands in the future. So everything you show in red here are the top priority areas in the valley, Ottawa Valley. So you see that it's mostly concentrated still in the Bristol and Clarendon area, as well as other places like, for example, here in the Allumette Island. I'll go through, I skipped this one. It's too, and time is running out. Now, NCC has volunteers that do stewardship on their properties. They do surveillance, cleaning, they do monitoring of species at risk, control of exotic species, and the NCC is also responsible for the Carapace project. It's a website where you can report your sightings of turtles. So it helps identify mortality hotspots, as well as help to precise the geographical distributions of all these species. So you see here some volunteers at work. Maybe some of you are in these pictures. And there are you also, which is a key actor in terms of protecting the Sault-des-Chats area. So if I'm right, you started existing in 2016, and here is your mission. So it's mostly a mission to interpreting the biodiversity, the wealth of the area, and organizing recreational activities respectful of the area. So you are in the same mind, I think, or the same direction taken by NCC or the Quebec Ministry of Wildlife in this area. Now, a few slides about specific protection measures that can be taken to protect some species. For example, turtles here. One of the main problems with turtles is road mortality. So that's why NCC put up in place this Carapace platform to report mortalities. But also, there are plans to posting in some problems area to tell people to reduce speed in certain critical periods, such as during the egg laying in June. There may be also some worker awareness, like people grading roads. Maybe in some cases, paving shoulders near breeding sites, it may help protect turtles because sometimes they will lay their eggs just at the edge of paved roads. So if it's unpaved, they will lay their eggs there, and then it's easier when they grade the road or the ATVs pass on that, they may destroy the eggs. If it's paved, then they will lay their eggs elsewhere. So that's another measure that can be taken. In some spot in Quebec, there have been some artificial islands created near problematic sites. They would put gravel and sands in mounds to incite turtles to go lay their eggs there. So that's a possibility. In Breckenridge, there's a fencing project. You probably have seen small fences when you go along the 148 in Breckenridge. So the fence is aimed at directing the turtles away from the road and towards culverts so they can cross the road without being hurt. Any question on this page? Okay, ATVs is another problem, especially in sand pits where turtles lay their eggs. So there may be posting done, but it's more or less efficient. People tend to not pay too much attention to that. In one spot in Bristol, the ministry put a fence around a much used sand pit, much used by turtles. So the fence allows turtle to go under, but not ATVs or to go through the area. But you see, the fence may be removed or there may be some vandalism. So it's not easy to manage. So the awareness of club and users is one of the key thing that can be done, especially if we are to authorize ATVs on the old CN railway corridor, as it is now proposed by the MRC. So I guess many of you will do comments on that specific issue.
Can I say something?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Just to reassure everyone, we've received quite a number of letters, especially from people in Pontiac Station. We have our plenary meeting on Wednesday. We'll be discussing that and this draft bylaw. So nothing will be decided too quickly, but just wanted to reassure you we've already been hearing from our residents in Bristol.
Okay, and when you say we, you're talking about?
Oh, I'm the warden of the MRC.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm Jane.
Yeah, so I considered important. Yeah, I considered important to mention that because the turtles may be also hurt by ATVs and other the snakes also. Anyway,
yes.
Another.
Well, just on that, I think that we need a much greater awareness of turtles. I mean, I couldn't even stand looking at that picture that you just had. And I see a lot of people in the Pontiac who will stop traffic to help turtles across. And I just think that we need to raise the awareness because everybody, if they're looking ahead, no matter what vehicle they're on, should have enough time to stop and avoid it.
Yeah.
Or stop, help it across. So I'm all for doing, more than just signs. I think that we need to really raise the awareness of everybody.
Yeah.
How important it is to protect.
Yeah, and about signs, when I was at the ministry, we considered that with the Ministry of Transport. And what we realized is that people don't pay too much attention at signs, except if they appear at precise periods with flashers, for example, and then you say, what's that? But if it's always there all year round, like signs for speed limit, for example, studies show that people don't pay too much attention when they used to go through certain parts of roads. So it cannot be efficient just alone as a measure, but it can help to reduce mortality in some cases, yes. And we see that more and more often. Even sometimes cottage association putting these signs by themselves, or parks like Maude-Emmanuelle Park in Quebec have some signs of their own. So yeah, it's a good point. Now another.
There's just another comment.
Yeah.
Ce serait vraiment intéressant d'en parler aux enfants dans les écoles de la région. So one of the options would be, an interesting option would be to talk to the kids in the schools of the region about this situation. They sometimes have influence on their parents.
Yeah. Again, when I was at the ministry, the game wardens were going into the schools at the primary. I don't know if it was 4 or 5 or 6 grade in the primary. And the last year I was there, they put there was a chapter added on threatened species. So they add some material that they presented to child about threatened species. I don't know to which extent they will go, but yes, it could be done through, for example, the game wardens that go into classes, or even groups from other, like I know that the Club des Ornithologues, the bird watching club, do some presentations in classrooms about birds. So yeah, it can be a good way to do awareness.
Maude was saying that as a parent of 2 children, she knows what she's talking about, is that they already do presentations in classes. We also have a question from Mr. Hendrickson about turtles. Some cottagers have lights on their cottages shining on the river all night long. Could that affect nesting of turtles? Would it be better to use motion censored lights?
Oh boy, very good questions. Most turtles will lay their eggs either early in the morning or in the evening, like not when it's dark, but late in the afternoon or early in the evening. But yes, some still travel at night, some females. I don't know what the impact of the light may have, quite frankly. It's a good question. I may inquire on that and come back to you, because I really don't know. But I know that some turtles, like the musk turtle, the smallest one I've shown you, it's a nocturnal species. Mainly, it also hunts during the day, but it's more active at night. So if you have huge spots towards the water, maybe it can reduce their hunting success. I don't know. Anyway, I'll inquire about that light impact regarding to egg laying. Sorry not to have the answer. Yeah. Okay. There are other measures that can be taken to protect the wildlife in general, and turtles or birds in particular. It's shore protection measures. So there are bylaws in the province of Quebec. These bylaws are also included and applied by MRCs and municipalities, where there should be a protection band along shores, 10 to 15 meters by generally speaking, which should be left natural, except for small windows to access the water. So we know that in several cases, these laws are not respected. And this may be harmful to wildlife, like birds. Many migrate in this short strip along water bodies, and turtle will lay their eggs at the edge of water. But if the shore is altered, it may be less attractive. Anyway, it's things that go with common sense, like not using pesticides at the edge of water, maintaining the buffer. In the water also, there is maybe some awareness also to be towards motorized boaters to reduce their speed, because we find during our studies, we found several turtles that have been wounded by propellers of these boats. So that's something that may help. Synthesizing associations and residents, restricting construction in sensitive area, where you were talking about Indian Point, so that's an example. There's an alvard there also, I mentioned alvard. The ministry also had protection measures for the operations of Logs End in the Pontiac. I don't know if they're still in operation, I guess so. They go under the water to get the old logs. So they were subject to conditions by the provincial government. They could not remove logs anchored to the bank, not less than 2 meters of water. So they cannot go in less than 2 meters of water. They could not do their works before June 15 and after September 30 to protect the spawning of fish and so forth. So there were some conditions for this kind of work. Do you know if they're still operating in the Ottawa River? Logs End?
I can say, yes, I know they're still selling their wood for flooring, and they may have had, quite an accumulation of it, but Gord Black's son has taken over and is really operating with a showroom in Ottawa. So I think they're still taking from the Ottawa River. One question I've always had was the Kalunge River, I don't think has ever been accessed. And of course, there was a log drive down the Kalunge, and it's quite shallow in places because of the buildup of logs. But I don't know what the comment would be on ever removing some of those. I've had a few people ask if it could be possible because they'd like to have a similar business. But do you have any comment on that, Daniel? Would that upset the habitat, or would there be some problems on the Kalunge River?
I remember because I discussed several times with Gordon Black, and we have a very collaborative relation. I know he was going in different places. Ottawa River is not the only place. We at the ministry were mainly concerned about the Knox Landing area. In fact, they have a map and they knew where they could not go on that map. But I know that they also were in different lakes in the Pontiac or even other regions. And we had conditions there also, like the dates you see there. It also applied depending on the species of fish. It may vary. The date may be different from one lake to another, if I remember. And the deep, I'm not sure. It's too long ago. But I know that we had conditions for lakes also. For Coulange River, I can't remember that we have a request for Coulange River. But I may check with Olivier Trudel, which is the biologist on my first slide, if he knows what's going on the Coulange River and which kind of conditions they put to logs in there, but I really don't know.
Two more comments to share. One for Madame Toller. to thank you for your intervention and the information that you provided. And you are right, we need to raise awareness about the turtles, rare habitats such as albars and other species at risk. And Mr. Hendrickson has added, I've heard that map turtles are particularly vulnerable to boat propeller strikes because they swim closer to the surface.
Musk turtles, you say, yeah?
Map turtles.
Map turtles? Yeah. Yeah, in fact, you're right. The musk turtle, la tortue musquée, will stay at the bottom. That's mostly where we found them. They have to go to the surface to breathe, but then after they go back at the bottom. But the map turtles, you will often see them on logs like here. And then they go into the water and they come back to bask. So yeah, they are more at risk of being hurt. And I remember we found quite a few turtles wounded during the course of our studies. I did not mention the snapping turtle, but it's a common one also in the area. And recently the federal government has given this turtle the status of species of concern. So even if it's quite common, it's becoming rarer in Canada. And to help turtles, we had a small pet project, the ministry in 2012. We put some floating logs in the Bristol area, 25 sites, to help the turtle in their basking activity. You have to know that the turtles are cold-blooded animals, so they have to get heat from the sun for their metabolism. So they like to bask. And we thought that there were not sufficient basking sites, so we added some. I don't know if they're still there. It's a project that doesn't last so long in general, but we noticed that 2/3 of the sites we put were used by map turtles in the area. As far as the water level variation, we were wondering if the operation at the Chat Dam could have some impact on the turtles. And frankly, we didn't find, still we don't know. We know that the water variation is not so much in amplitude. It's about 1 meter. If you have been canoeing there, you don't see huge variation of the water level there. As you see, for example, if you go at Baskatong in north of Maniwaki, where water level may change up and down 30 meters in 1 year. Here in the Bristol area, it's not so. The dam, the main problem we found, in fact, was more related to beaver dams that people would dismantle without announcing it, at any time, without talking to nobody and without asking permit. So as far as water level variation are concerned, it's mostly beaver dams that we looked at. And we realized that one way of improving the situation was to put some structures that help maintain water in beaver ponds, but lower the water level, so diminish the risk of the dam broke and the water goes downstream and causes damage to roads or cottages or so forth. So when you use such structures, and several of them were installed in the Bristol area in Clarendon, you can lower the level, still keep the habitat for the tortue mouchetée, the Blanding's turtle, which is the target species for that habitat. So there's an organism called the CERFO, Centre d'enseignement et de recherche en foresterie de Sainte-Foy. Jean Fink, you may know that guy. It's a former biologist at the ministry, and now he works with the CERFO. And they put, over the last year in Bristol and in other places in the Pontiac, several water control structures like this one. in beaver ponds. In fact, I have a map here where you can see where they worked, and they have several places in Bristol. One in Clarendon, in Leachfield, Cuillon, Île-du-Grand-Calumet, and I know that they have new places since then. Also, what they did to improve the situation as regard to water control, at the Knox Landing Road, they put some more gravel to heighten the height of the road, so it would be no more flooded. They put a new culvert, so it prevents the road from being flooded, and also prevent intempestive actions from landowners who would destroy beaver dams to tackle this problem. So it's an example of things that can be done, even working on roads or with beaver dams, to diminish the impact of beavers and allowing landowners not to be flooded, all their lands be flooded. So that's a program which is quite interesting that the CERFO has done in the area over the last years.
Just to let you know that it's 6 minutes past 9. So
yeah, but it was my last picture because here is the photo credits.
Good timing.
Yeah, good timing.
Perfect.
So thanks for watching. And if you have any questions that might pop up later, you can email them. I don't know, Deb, if you want to act as a point to get the information, because I might email you the answers of the questions I've already noted here. And if people have other questions, they can file it to me through Deb. And it will be my pleasure to answer if I can. In some cases, I might not be able to answer, like the question about the lights with respect to turtle legs laying. I would make some research, but I'm not sure that we have answers on this.
Yes, I would certainly be able to do that. I think everyone has my email. They would have gotten an invitation somehow through me.
So one closing comment. Thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. It's wonderful to know of all the actions being taken to understand and care for our fellow creatures in this special part of the Ottawa River watershed. From Lynn Jones. And you have a few applauses, so I think everyone has enjoyed your presentation, as I have.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to get back to the presentation, but
Là, Daniel, tu vois toutes les mains, là, ça veut dire que les gens t'applaudissent.
Yes, I know, but I'm not able to come back to the, I don't know how to come back because j'avais réduit l'icône. Anyway, I understand that you're satisfied, and it was my pleasure to do that again. And I think Deb recorded it, did you?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Good.
Except that I was kicked out for a while there, so I don't know whether it continued to record. I have one more comment from Jennifer Houghton. Have worked with the NCC on their Carapace project, and any observations of turtles alive, wounded, dead, including turtles on the road, trails, and natural habitats are valuable to studying trends. Even if you are unsure of species, please send in observations to Carapace. Merci, super intéressant.
Okay, good.
Oh, 3 new messages.
Thank you, Danielle. Very interesting.
Okay.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Merci, Danielle. Excellent presentation on a slice of Pontiac paradise. Let's continue to work on guarding against economic development, chemical farmers, and other threats to this parcel of land and water, including nuclear waste upstream. Thanks to all for participating in the meeting, including our warden, Jane, and thanks to Deborah for organizing it. Good for the spirit during a lockdown. And that is a message from Michael McBain. Thank you very much, Michael.
Donc, ben,
new messages still coming in. Merci, j'ai beaucoup appris et ça a répondu à mes questions et aux questions que j'avais. Ça, c'est comme de Carole Savard. Thank you so much. A great presentation, very informative and worth listening to from Gail Clark.
Merci. Au revoir.
Bonne soirée. You just click on the end button and you're out.
Yeah.
Merci
Oh,
beaucoup.
Maude, tu as une question?
Oui, ben en fait, je voulais juste remercier Daniel pour sa présentation, pour avoir accepté de présenter tous ces résultats de recherche sur ce secteur-là. Je suis impressionnée à chaque fois de voir à quel point il y a eu des travaux qui ont été faits sur ce secteur-là qui est vraiment magnifique. Donc, ben c'est ça, je vous inviterai à suivre notre page Facebook pour des prochains événements. J'espère qu'on va renouveler, cette formule. Puis j'espère que très bientôt, on va avoir la chance d'aller sur le terrain pour aller voir ça de plus près. Donc, j'espère qu'on aura la chance de, peut-être que Daniel, tu aimerais ça nous accompagner. Ça pourrait peut-être être intéressant de faire une visite terrain lorsque la santé, les responsables de la santé publique permettront à nouveau ce genre d'activité-là. Donc, je vous remercie tout le monde d'avoir été parmi nous aujourd'hui. Donc, puis à une prochaine fois. Merci.
OK, merci.
Merci.
Very much.